Hello YouTube. Today I want to speak about time or mysteries of time, and I want to tell you about some of the very interesting cases that I've collected through the years of my research, cases that pertain to the old Soviet Union and later to the countries that are now independent but were used to be part of the Soviet Union. I don't want to discuss the nature of time. To me, it's a mystery. I've had my own very interesting experiences, but I'm not going to ruminate or pontificate. Everybody has its own idea of time, and I think most of us on this planet do not understand what it is. But it's fascinating. So let's look at the cases of people moving in or through time, including for the periods of days or more into the future or the past. And we'll look at the Russian history. So I'll make some comments, not too many, and some descriptions of historical periods for those who are not very familiar with the history of the country where I was born. So we will start with the Crimean expedition against Moscow. It was a military campaign of the Crimean Khan, or ruler, Devlet Giray, to Russia in the spring of 1571, during which he managed to circumvent the defensive positions of the Russian army and approach Moscow. As a result of the fighting in the outskirts, the largest Moscow fire of the 16th century began, and anyway, due to the strong wind and heat, the capital, with the exception of the Kremlin, was almost completely burned out. After that, the Khan's, or the ruler's army, went southeast, plundering Russian lands. As a result of this campaign, 80 to 120,000 people died, and about 60,000 people were taken prisoner. And there is a very interesting temporal spatial case. One detachment of the Khan Devlet's army was mistaken or disoriented, not by a place, but by time. They confused the year of 1571 with 1621. The Tatars, caught by the guard of Tsar Mikhail Fedorovich Romanov, swore that they, as a part of the Tatar army, took part in the assault on Moscow in the year of 1571 and accidentally drove their horses into a deep ravine where some strange fog flowed. Some strange fog was found in that ravine. They left the ravine, but from the time the battle ended, half a century had passed, and they were lost in time. Now, I want to tell you what a ravine is. It comes from this old Latin word rapina. Ravine means a small, deep, narrow valley in English. Also a deep, narrow, steep side valley, especially one formed by the action of running water. I think similar words are abyss, canyon, gorge, pass, gulch, arroyo, and kloof in South Africa. I spent some time in Southern Africa, had a few adventures because I pursued research based on writings of Ivan Yefremov, and I did very interesting field research, but that's for the later. So we'll talk about ravines and time traps later. I want to go back to history. In one of the regimental archives of the old Russian army, an investigative document was kept, sealed with the signatures of all officers of the regiment and members of the emergency commission that was established. And basically, here's what it said. The regiment commander was expected to arrive at the regiment. One evening, we saw that the apartment prepared for him was lit. There was light in it. When everyone gathered in the hall, the commander left the office, talked with the officers, and made some orders. The next day, in the morning, they again inform us of the commander's arrival. The astonished officers gathered again in the hall. Again, the commander came out of the door, said the same thing as the day before, gave the same orders, and continuing the conversation, went to his office. Going to the door, he stared and asked, "Do you see?" When everyone approached, they saw. Another commander of the regiment sat at his desk. It was his double. The actual commander approached his double, and when the latter instantly disappeared, he fell to the floor. Similar meetings with so-called ourselves took place in the 19th century, involving the Russian poet Vyazemsky in St. Petersburg. Actually, he found himself sitting at the table writing a letter. But also in the 18th century with Empress Anna in 1740, 3 days before her death, the royal guard received orders to and almost opened fire on the false royalty, on the false empress. And during the reign of the great Russian Empress Catherine II, a strange young man appeared in the capital and claimed to be born in the 20th century. He clearly suffered from mental disorders, but he spoke so convincingly that he was eventually introduced to the Empress. And the young man not only told Ekaterina the date of her death, the year of the murder of Emperor Paul I, but also spoke about the invasion of Napoleon into Russia, and also predicted the end of the Romanov dynasty. The angry empress kicked the charlatan out of the palace. But here's what's interesting. All the tales the strange visitor told her, they all came true. Now, here's a case from the period of the Great Patriotic War, or World War II, as it is called in the Soviet Union and in Russia. In the winter of 1942, 6 Soviet partisans, guerrilla fighters, were given the task of capturing a German officer with documents, and they organized an ambush on the Minsk highway to carry this operation, to carry it out. The darkness quickly thickened, but suddenly, for some reason, everything became bright. The partisans saw that an incomprehensible light tunnel had formed over the highway, and that absolutely noiselessly, cars, vehicles of unusual form, squat with large windows, they rolled out. Then a bus appeared, also unusual, more like a glazed box. And after the bus, a sleek white car with the inscription ambulance rushed through. Now, this strange phenomenon lasted from 3 to 4 minutes. One of the eyewitnesses, Karatkevich, later told, 30 years later, when Icarus buses and the so-called 24th Volga vans, equipped for transporting patients, when they appeared on the roads of the Soviet Union, he recognized them as the bus and the ambulance, which he observed back in 1942. By the way, the Soviet partisans did not catch that Nazi officer. He never arrived at the site of the ambush, but perhaps it was intense expectation, a special psycho-emotional state associated with the risk to life that contributed to the appearance before their eyes of this picture from the future. Now I want to talk about some military cases. And I want to talk about Sevastopol. It's the largest city in the Crimean Peninsula and a major Black Sea port. Since annexing Crimea in 2014, the Russian Federation has administered Sevastopol as a federal city in the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, Ukraine and most of the United Nations member countries consider to regard Sevastopol as a city with special status within Ukraine. The population is made up mostly Russians with a small number of Ukrainians and Tatars. I'm not going to talk about politics here. What I want to tell you is a very interesting case. A resident of Sevastopol, a retired naval officer, Ivan Pavlovich Zaligin, has been studying the problem of time travel for over 30 years. The captain of the second rank became interested in this phenomenon after a very curious and mysterious incident that happened to him at the end of the 1980s of the 20th century, and it took place in the Pacific Ocean during his service as a deputy commander of a Soviet diesel submarine. I urge you, listeners, to please look at my other videos about the Pacific Ocean and strange phenomena that the Soviet and Russian seamen and sailors and naval officers had encountered. Anyway, during one of the training trips in the area of the La Perouse Strait, the submarine was caught in a severe thunderstorm. The commander of the submarine decided to bring the submarine to surface position. As soon as the ship surfaced, the sailor on duty reported that he saw an unidentified craft directly ahead. Soon they found out that the Soviet submarine stumbled upon a rescue boat located in neutral waters, in which the Soviet submariners found a half-dead, frostbitten man in the uniform of a Japanese military sailor of the Second World War period. When examining personal belongings, a premium Parabellum handgun was found on the rescued person, as well as the documents issued on September 14, 1940. After the report, the command of the base of the submarine was ordered to go to the port of Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, where the counterintelligence was already waiting for the Japanese naval officer. The GRU counterintelligence officers took a signed document from the team members. It was for the non-disclosure of this fact, a story, over the next 10 years. Now, in the late 1980s of the last century, there was another striking case that occurred in the city of Sevastopol, still part of the USSR at the time, which it's very hard to explain rationally. And I wish I had more details about this case, but here's what I know. Despite the fact that the authorities carefully tried to classify it, one of the direct witnesses to the incident decided, at an old age, to share a long-held secret with the public. The authority of this person is beyond doubt, well, to those who have initially reported the story. We're talking about the captain of the ship, whose crew encountered the consequences of a mysterious temporal anomaly at the time. In the summer of 1989, in the Sevastopol Bay, a warship of the Black Sea Fleet was at anchor at the pier. One of the sailors who were on guard duty unexpectedly noticed bubbles a couple of meters from the side of the ship, as if someone was underwater. So the sailor immediately reported this to the captain, and less than 3 minutes passed, a boat was lowered into the water very quickly. That's what I want to say. Approaching the suspicious bubbles, Russian sailors saw an ascending or surfacing diver in a German diving suit from Second World War. Having detained him, they delivered the stranger to the ship, and there they first removed the mask from the diver. Now the frightened stranger immediately said "Hitler kaputt" in German, thereby expressing loyalty to the country that detained him. The man spoke exclusively German, so they needed a translator who was easily found among the sailors of the ship. With his help, the detained man told the Soviet sailors that he was a German saboteur, and his name was Erhard Zimmelmann. Today, according to the stranger, was the 15th of June of 1943, and that he secretly swam here to Sevastopol to mine the Sevastopol Bay. Needless to say, the captain of the ship was simply shocked by this statement. He asked the translator several times to repeat the same questions to the diver, and the German each time answered the same thing. Now we're in the Second World War, and he is a soldier of the Third Reich. Although he does not at all share the Nazi ambitions of the Führer, and personally has nothing against the Soviet Union, but he is a military man, and an order is an order. So the Soviet captain had to contact the military counterintelligence. After talking with the detainee, they quickly took the diver away, and with him the soldier translator. Both people were never seen again on this ship. The next day, the ship's captain himself was summoned to the headquarters of the Black Sea Fleet, where he was informed that he was obliged to keep quiet about what had happened, otherwise he could not avoid troubles in his service. So for many years the witness was really silent, but some years ago he decided that it was time to tell the people the truth. Now that he was retired, the demotion did not threaten him, and the Soviet government had long ago been replaced. So the former captain had no special reasons to fear for his safety. However, just in case, he still did not reveal his name, nor did he say that what cruiser he commanded in Sevastopol in the late 1980s of the last century. So, most likely, we're talking about a crack in the space-time continuum, during which the German military saboteur was moved forward 46 years. Now, in Germany in 1943, he was probably considered to be dead, deceased. It would be interesting to know the fate of this man. It seems that when he materialized in 1989 in the Sevastopol Bay as a young man, just as he was almost half a century ago, before that, it doesn't seem likely that he would be sent by Soviets to his homeland for any inquiries. But if this story is true, what would be his fate? Is there a special research institute for such cases? I think so, but it would not have been solely one nation enterprise, nor is it today. You know what, let's leave it at that and look at more cases. In 1982, at a Soviet Air Force base in Belarusia, a military aircraft disappeared from the screens of dispatcher radars during flights. After some time, according to experts, the fuel in the tanks of the fighter would have been gone. So the search for the missing military pilot started after he never came back to his base, but it produced no results. However, the next day everyone was in shock when the missing fighter landed on the runway, and the pilot said that the flight for him lasted as planned 12 minutes. Now I want to talk about the nuclear connection. And I want to talk about Semipalatinsk. The Semipalatinsk test site, STS or Semipalatinsk 21, was also known as the Polygon. It was the primary testing venue for the Soviet Union's nuclear weapons. It is located in the steppe in the northeast Kazakhstan, or Kazakh SSR at the time, south of the valley of the Irtysh River. The scientific buildings for the test site were located around 150 kilometers west of the town of Semipalatinsk. Later it was renamed to Semi. It was near the border of East Kazakhstan region and Pavlodar region. And most of the nuclear tests were taking place at various sites further to the west and south. The Soviet Union conducted 456 nuclear tests at Semipalatinsk from 1949 until 1989. same year, with little result for their effect on the local people or environment. The full impact of radiation exposure was hidden for many years by Soviet authorities, and it only has come to light since the test site closed in 1991. What's interesting, by the way, from 1996 to 2012, there was a secret joint operation of the Kazakh, the Russian, and the US nuclear scientists and engineers, and they secured the waste plutonium in the tunnels of the mountains there. Now, since its closure, the STS has become the best research atomic testing site in the world, and the only one in the world open to the public. Now, I want to talk about the phenomenon of disruption of time that could be caused by a nuclear explosion in Semipalatinsk. And it was in Semipalatinsk that scientist Alexeyenko and two other military specialists were at the head of the well when an explosion struck right below them at a depth of 3 kilometers. And he remembers, something lifted me. The people in front of me were suddenly downstairs and somehow diminished. I ceased to feel the earth beneath me. It seemed that the whole globe disappeared. Then I heard a heavy, very heavy sigh from somewhere below, after which I found myself at the bottom of a deep ravine. Ivanov disappeared from sight, and Konstantin Mikhailovich was on the edge of a cliff. I saw him as it were through a huge lens, enlarged several times. Then the wave subsided. We all stood again on a flat surface, which like jelly shuddered. Then it seemed as if the door to another world slammed sharply. The trembling ceased, and the earth firmament froze again, giving me a feeling of real gravity. Let's talk about some other phenomenon. Air vortices, tornadoes, produce a slightly lesser effect maybe than nuclear explosions, but they also carry a whole bouquet of phenomena associated with change in time, delay in hours, change in the weight of objects, and the appearance of unusual extrasensory abilities in people after exposure to a vortex. Once in Soviet Georgia in 1984, they checked the correctness of the progress of all working, non-broken watches and clocks that were in houses destroyed by a recent tornado. Researchers did not find a single correctly running alarm clock, and in one courtyard, from the wreckage and debris that they removed an electronic alarm clock, and it showed time ahead by 8 minutes. The researchers wish they could conduct a better experiment with tornadoes, but it doesn't seem to be possible. Also, incredible effects occur in rotating charged plasma. This is what we know as a ball lightning. For example, the Artyomov family, husband and wife from Vladivostok, described their meeting with this guest from another time in a letter addressed to the Russian research group, the Phenomenon Commission, that's their name in English. And they say, in 1990, ball lightning flew into our window. It did no harm, bursting somehow soundlessly. We experienced shock a little later, when the TV program Verona began to be broadcast on television, although all the clocks in the apartment showed that there were at least 15 minutes more before the regular scheduled broadcast. Perhaps you can also explain, they're asking this commission, why the electronic alarm clock flashed, but the mechanical watches and even the cuckoo clock strangely lagged behind at the same time. Now let's look at some UFO cases that involve time. There'll be one more, but later. Meanwhile, I just want to summarize a few. For example, in 1982, all the watches on board of the Black Sea ship stopped. In 1958, in Kazakhstan, The clock stopped for all this. Clock stopped with all the students sitting next to the fire when a large disc flew over them at altitude of 3 meters. So in 1978 in the Atlantic, for the same reason, all the watches stopped with the passenger of the Tatar motor ship. And in October 1983, same case with the geologist Emil Fyodorovich Bachurin. I mentioned him in some other videos. And this time it was 12 kilometers from the Malepka in the Perm region. That's a very unusual place, and there are legends about it. Nevertheless, this is what was reported. Now, due to the slowdown of time near the UFO, numerous cases of disruption of the normal operation of radio stations and receivers were recorded in 1977 at the Volga floating base in the Barents Sea. And also, I believe, in 1977, and the Vasily Kiselev trawler in the Atlantic, and in 1985 in Batumi, Soviet Georgia. I covered a lot about USOs and UFOs that were observed by Soviet Navy personnel in my books, the one that I have co-written with Philip Mantel about Russian USO secrets. I urge you to read it. I'm sure you can find it in libraries if you cannot buy it. I've collected quite a lot, and Philip and I did a great deal of research. And the book is now available in Russia too, which is, a great surprise to me. Nevertheless, I wanted to bring up UFOs and effects on time. But now I want to talk about some medical or rather psychiatric cases. For almost 40 years of medical practice, the Yekaterinburg psychiatrist Ekaterina Stepanovna Terentьева had the opportunity to encounter patients who claimed that they lived in a different time era. So, in 1968, a teenager who was very poorly fluent in Russian, modern Russian, entered a psychoneurological boarding school with a young Dr. Terentьева, and he had a diagnosis of malignant schizophrenia. From his incoherent speech, it nevertheless followed that he was the Count's serf Vanka Grushin from Chlapunovka. Now, serf was a member of a servile feudal class, bound to the land and subject to the wills of his owner. Okay? Centuries ago, of course, in Russian history. The teenager said that he went swimming and then ended up in an unfamiliar place. The words of the young patient were indirectly confirmed by the information on the medical record, according to which he was found by police at a small railway station near Sverdlovsk without any documents. The teenager was very scared and could not clearly explain where he was from and who his parents were. And at another occasion, Ekaterina Stepanovna met with a similar patient in the mid-1980s. Then a man was brought to the facility for compulsory treatment. He claimed to be in a plane crash that occurred in 1973 in the Ufa region in the Soviet Union. The man said that the burning passenger plane was ready to crash into the ground when he lost conscience. He woke up in an unfamiliar city in the hospital ward in 1985. What happened to him in that large time period equal to 12 years, he just didn't remember. Ekaterina Stepanovna decided to apply hypnosis to her unusual patient in order to extract at least some information from the dark corners of his subconscious. As a result, Terentьева managed to learn very little. In particular, while in a state of hypnotic sleep, the patient said that shortly before the plane with panicky passengers was about to crash into the ground, he had a sudden and very severe headache. At some point, the man felt a terrible cold. The sound surrounding him suddenly disappeared. There was absolute silence, and he lost conscience. The next picture captured by the patient's brain is the ceiling of the hospital room where he was taken shortly before he spoke to the doctor. I want to talk about strange locations too as it pertains to time. You know, Russia is the largest country in the world, and we have quite a lot of interesting paranormal locations, but there are some that are specifically tied to lost time phenomenon. In the Russian media, there were publications devoted to the famous sandstone on the Pleshevo Lake, the city of Pereyaslav-Zalesky. If you ever travel there in Russia, you will find it. Visit it. At the same time, the local legend is also mentioned. It was said that the rich city of Hleshin used to be on the shore of the lake, but it was abandoned for no reason by its residents. Apparently, the spirit of the lake cursed the city, and therefore Pereyaslav-Zalesky was already being built away from the lake beyond the forest. All this, of course, is a legend, but locals still regard Pleshev Lake as a living creature. Rumor has it that fogs frequent in the vicinity of the lake are very dangerous. If you find yourself inside the fog, you can fall out of life for several days, although these days will seem like minutes to you. And if you cannot go out at all or find yourself, if you cannot leave, you'll find yourself in another time and space. So don't visit it without guides. If you're into adventures, speak to the locals first before you go. Now, similar anomalies are known in the Nizhny Ilimsky district of the Irkutsk region, Siberia, where 3 employees of the local police department disappeared near the so-called Dead Lake several years ago. By the way, in the same area 5 years earlier, a train of 23 cars and the people accompanying this train had literally gone nowhere. Very interesting. Look at my video about the strange train mysteries and time-space continuum disruption of Russian history. I will put a link in the description to my other videos too that tell the cases of strange time incidents from Russia and elsewhere. Anyway, near the Pskov village of Lyadi, in the area where the ravine, which the people call Devil, is located, people are also regularly lost. Somehow in 1928, a team went there for logging and disappeared. There is a whole list of disappearances that's maintained in the area to this day. Also, mushroom pickers, recklessly looking for butter mushrooms and chanterelles in this place, can wake up in the forest for several days in full confidence that only a few hours have passed. Now, I want to talk about some really strange cases. Again, in 1980s, as you can see yourself, quite a lot had been taking place in 1980s, or the people were less afraid to report such things, or at least write them down, you know, with the perestroika and changes in the Soviet Union. But anyway, a group of students rented a small village house for the summer in the Leningrad region. All they knew about the house, it was known that its first owner disappeared about 30 years ago. So one evening, young people heard an incomprehensible rustle or noise in the basement. It was impossible to get there unnoticed, and they themselves never went down to the basement because of the unpleasant smell that constantly was present down below. For the same reason, the basement lid had always been tightly closed. So, looking there, they found an unfamiliar man who rummaged through the old things in the basement. The man said that he lives in this house and began to ask them who they were. The impression he made on them that he was not mentally healthy, not everything was in his head normal. Most of all, he was interested in where the jars with cucumbers had disappeared too. At his request, they gave him a lantern, and he spent another 15 minutes in the basement. And then everything suddenly died down there, and the lights went out. Since the man was supposed to be there, the students called out to him, but no one answered. Going down to the basement, the young people did not find anyone there. Things were scattered, but the basement was empty. Together with the stranger, the lantern also disappeared. So the students carefully examined everything there, especially the walls and floor, because there might be an underground passage in the basement. But they found nothing like that, nothing. So that night they told the villagers about what had happened, described in detail the appearance of that stranger. The elderly villagers were amazed. According to the description, they recognized the very owner who disappeared 30 years ago. Apparently, 30 years ago, a time-space tunnel opened in the basement, which transferred the owner to another time. Most likely, there it flowed differently, because having returned here, he did not seem to change. In addition, he was sure that he was here in the same year in which he disappeared from here, from this location. That's according to people who had been studying this case. Now, again, at the end of the 20th century in Voronezh, there was a fantastic event also pertaining to time travel. In the early morning, a young lady suddenly appeared on the street of that city dressed in a white bathrobe. She was clearly not herself, and suspecting nothing, she went into the store and tried to pay the store with old Soviet-style banknotes or bills that had long been out of circulation. That's all I know about this case, but I do want to talk about one that occurred in Kiev, where I am from, and as far as I know, still not logically explained. And this very unusual case took place in 2006. So, on a city street, a person was found. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes with an outdated film camera on his neck. The guy who detained him was presented with only one document, which he had with him. So he gave it to the person who detained him, and the document was an old Soviet Komsomol issued ID of the 1956 type. And it was issued in the name of Sergei Ponomarenko. Due to the strange behavior of the stranger, the police decided to show him to a psychiatrist. When speaking to the medical specialist, the young man said that he remembers a UFO that he photographed with his FED-2 brand camera, popular in the USSR. I can attest to it. Then a sudden flash, and he found himself in an unknown place. So the police decided to develop that film. In the images, they saw a guest from the past, this guest from the past, with his girlfriend, and indeed a UFO snapshot. In the psychologist's office, the young man carefully examined the photographs, and then he went to the medical ward and later suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if dissolved in the thin air. While investigating this case in 2006, the district police officer turned to archival documents and stumbled upon a similar case in 1978, when, under unclear circumstances, the full namesake, Sergei Valentinovich Ponomarenko, went missing. In the old criminal case, it appeared that the missing young man left the house and did not return, and he had a FED camera with him. Based on the materials of the old case, the district police officer found an adult friend of this man who had disappeared in the past. The most unexpected turn in this mysterious story was an envelope from Ponomarenko, which was shown to a woman by a policeman. In the envelope was a letter from Sergei Valentinovich Ponomarenko and a photograph of himself and he was looking considerably aged. He was an elderly man who stood on the coastal strip of the Dnieper hydropark on the background of the Pechersky Hill in Kiev, which was built up with modern high-rise buildings. But however, 2006, nothing of this kind was built on this site yet. As the saying goes, the investigation absolutely stalled, and the mysterious case remained unresolved. I don't know anything more about this case. I'm surprised that he had the 1956 documents and supposedly disappeared in 1978. As you can see, there are a lot of cases, and you will see more links to my other videos. I'm fascinated by this secrets or mysteries of time, and again, we still don't know really what time is. I urge you please to view my videos. Please support my research. The links on to how to do it are in the description. I appreciate it, and I want to bring you more interesting videos. Thank you for your time, and until we meet again.